The next matchup on this evening slate, we've got Kansas City at the Raiders. Obviously, Antonio Pierce has got the Raiders playing ball, winning games, but Josh Jacobs' usage, after saying he's going to, build the team around him, they've basically stopped giving him any usage in the passing game. His point production hasn't ticked up like we hoped. I called him a potential league winner a couple of weeks ago. Do you think now that, we can get back on board with Jacobs, or do you think he's now a back-end RB1 behind RB2?
The most concerning thing for me wasn't even the passing game usage. It was just, that in general, he just got scripted out of the game a bit against the Dolphins. In the previous 3 games, he'd averaged 104 scrimmage yards, and then that dropped down by a half to 51 against Miami. And I think this game for me actually feels like one which could be sneaky low in points. I think the Chiefs' defense is absolutely legitimate, and what we saw against the Eagles is how the Chiefs are going to have to win games this year by hoping that their defense can do enough. They allow the 7th fewest quarterback fantasy points, the 9th fewest running back fantasy points, the 8th fewest wide receiver fantasy points. So I don't see how the Raiders are going to move the ball. But then on the other side of this, the Raiders have been a good pass defense themselves. They've allowed the 13th fewest quarterback fantasy points, the 13th fewest wide receiver fantasy points, the 13th fewest tight end fantasy points. What they haven't been good against is the run, where they've allowed the 5th most fantasy points. So do we see Pacheco come out and really ball out? He's had 18 touches a game since week 4, but he rarely ever gets over 100 yards, which makes it difficult to play him on DraftKings because you want players with that 3-point bonus. And he's only had 4 touchdowns this year. So if you're out there getting 70 yards, that's great. But if you're not getting huge pass game volume, it doesn't really turn into a good fantasy day. I think that the Chiefs need to get something going because the offense just kind of looks a little bit broken, really. Mahomes has been outside quarterback 10 in 5 of the last 7, which seems mad for a player of Mahomes' stature. Kelsey got back up into the top 12 tight ends after 2 games outside there. But you look at what they were doing this week, and Justin Watson's getting 11 targets. He's a player who, we've really barely ever seen on the field at times. Kadarius Toney, they seem to be making an effort to really get him involved coming off the bye. 4 touches for 26 yards. It's just not good enough. MVS, that drop was egregious, possibly even worse than the Quentin Johnston one. I mean, they're both, playing both on a loop, and both of them were horrendous. So I don't have a lot of interest in this game. You start Mahomes, you start Kelsey if you've got him in redraft in Dynasty. You start Isaiah Pacheco because he's got a really good matchup. On the other side of this, Devontae Adams has given us a little bit more hope because he's back-to-back games with 80-plus yards, and he scored his first touchdown since week 3. But the Chiefs have been excellent against wide receivers all year. They have one of the best teams at holding wide receiver ones in check. We saw it against A.J. Brown this week. And now, are we going to tell ourselves a story that Devontae Adams can overcome that whilst he's got Aiden O'Connell throwing him the ball? I'm pretty skeptical, to be honest. And Hunter Renfrow, seeing a season-high 5 targets, if anything, aiding the Jacoby Myers workload enough that it becomes difficult to trust him. So if you need to start Devontae Adams, you probably should, but I don't feel very good about that one whatsoever. And Josh Jacobs, I think you have to start. But again, for me, this is one of those games which is just a very easy fade for DFS this weekend.
Yeah, it feels like the Adams play is purely just hoping on volume. We talk about 43 over under. 99% of the cash is on the under again. So I think this is a matchup that people are expecting to play the under. And, the Chiefs, I think they're 30th in points scored as an offense in the second half so far this year. It just feels like this could be the Chiefs get 2 scores up early and then just run the game out. And it's a boring, low-scoring affair that's not going to achieve anything for fantasy.